Hey guys, it's Saturday, November 20th at about 1:30. I want to do a video talking about the gender binary and how I label in regards to existing within the gender binary and then when I choose to step outside the gender binary. A lot of this has come to the forefront of my mind lately because I've been doing a lot of presentations around the community and at Chico State, and every time I do a workshop or presentation, one of the amazing things that happens for me is that I'm continuing to challenge my own sort of beliefs and identities that I subscribe to and things that I believe in and so forth. So obviously gender binary says that there are two gender or sex options, male or female, masculine and feminine, and most of us, if not all of us, would agree that not only is the gender binary confining, but it's also socially constructed. So it's only as valid and as real as we make it out to be. And that's not to say that there aren't components of that social construction that is way beyond just our own personal beliefs. There's societal standards and even laws and cultural and religious aspects to the gender binary. But for the purposes of this conversation, basically what I'm going to be talking about is my own belief system and how I see my own gender and my sex and how I perform gender differently in different areas. And I think that we all perform our gender all the time, every day, all of us, regardless if we're trans or not. And if we have a better understanding of how we perform our gender and when we perform it certain ways at certain times and how that benefits us or doesn't benefit us, to deconstruct that, I think would really benefit a lot of people. So having said that, I realized recently two things. When I'm operating within the gender binary, the male or female option, I obviously identify with male. I don't know that I ever solidly or comfortably identified as female, but I certainly haven't always comfortably or solidly identified as male within that binary system. I felt like I identified as something that wasn't being provided. I didn't have language to construct my reality or construct my identity. And I also get that when I talk about the gender binary, I'm talking about a socially constructed experience that I basically say is bullshit, and that those are not the only two options. But I can also understand and appreciate how my life and my very existence is a contradiction, if you will, about my message of the binary, because in the process of my transition, I left one physical space, that being female, to move into another physical space, that being male. And so when presented with the options of F or M on my ID and my social security number and all of those places that F or M shows up that profoundly impacts our lives, I choose M. I could choose to remain F, but I don't think that would actually tell you much more about me than having an M tells you. So between those two options, obviously I'm going to choose M. But what I have come to really terms with recently is that, yes, I identify as male, but I identify as a trans man. I don't think that if you were to sit me down at the table with a 34-year-old cis man, that he and I would have the same experiences. I don't think that he and I would have the same construction of our identities. I don't think that he and I would understand or define masculinity in the same way. I don't think he and I would relate to our bodies in the same way. I don't think he and I would understand femininity the same way, or misogyny, or sexism, or heterosexism. I don't think he and I would see eye to eye. Not that we wouldn't see eye to eye, but we would definitely have different understandings. We would come from different places because our experiences are different, and it is because all of those things that, yes, within the binary I am male, but when I step outside the binary, I'm a trans man, and that trans part in front of the male part tells you a hell of a lot about me and about my experiences and my situatedness, you know, like where my circumstances and situations have led me to be and to think and to understand and what space I occupy as a result. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and I know that there's a lot of debate around trans man, trans woman, as opposed to male man or woman, male female, and so I guess I'm just kind of in the process of working through that and coming to terms and understanding that, and how I'm exercising my right to self-identify using terms that work for me differently in different spaces, and understanding that when I'm standing in front of a classroom or a group of people and performing my gender in the way of, you know, really accentuating my transgender identity, that's different than how that performance goes is different than when I am in a place where people maybe don't know that I'm trans, or my trans identity isn't as relevant as other parts of my identity. Today I'm vegan, and I'm a big time supporter and I would say passive activist as far as veganism is concerned, but I've been given the opportunity today to go to an event that is celebration for the turkeys. So we feed the turkeys instead of having the turkeys feed us. And so that is a realm that I'm going to go, and I'm going to actively engage in other parts of my identity and my activism. And being trans is not the most important thing. So in that environment with those people, I'll just be male. I will be occupying male space and male energy within the binary, but that's different. So how I'm going to perform my gender this afternoon is different than how I perform it when I'm educating or standing in front of a group of people, and both of those places are different compared to when I'm in a space that is not about activism. So kind of thinking about how we all perform our gender differently, and how we may identify ourselves differently depending upon the context in which we're talking about. The other thing that I've come to really realize in the last, I don't know, month, maybe 2 months or so, I guess particularly since we moved back to Chico in August, is that I've kind of been in this transitionary period with regards to my sexuality and how I identify, or how I label that. Who I have sex with hasn't changed. Christy and I are in a monogamous relationship, so there's been no difference as far as my partners are concerned, and there's been no difference about how we have sex with each other. But what is different is my understanding of the labels that I use to identify myself. Prior to my transition, I solidly and completely identified as a lesbian, and on a scale of 0 to 6, 6 being exclusively homosexual, I very much self-identified as a 6. And when I first started my transition, what became glaringly obvious to me was that I absolutely had capacities to be attracted to men. I'm very attracted to men, both in a physical way, but also in an admiration sort of a way. I still look at men as a way of learning how to be a man, not behaviorally, but physically, like how, you know, clothes fit, or how men walk, or how men talk. And that's not to say that I'm looking to learn how to be a man, but I'm an observer, and I'm a critical thinker, and I look both internally and externally for education, and to not look at men around me as an opportunity to learn about how I walk in the world, and how I occupy space, much like how other men occupy the space. So when I look at men, I look at that place of education, critical thinker, and then I also absolutely look at, like, holy shit, he's fucking hot. And that is something that is relatively new. It's definitely transition related. I didn't have that capacity or that insight, or I wasn't willing to tear down that wall and not be afraid of that prior to transition. And so for the last 2.5, 3 years, I've really solidly identified as queer, both with my gender and my sexuality, because I didn't know how else to explain having a cis female partner who identifies as queer and has had previous relationships with women, who's now having a relationship with a trans man who finds both men and women, cis, trans, and all variations attractive. The only way that I knew how to make any sense of that was queer, and for so long the queer community was my family, it was my home. I was a lesbian activist, I was a gay rights activist for years and years and years, and my ideology around that didn't shift or change just because my body did. But in recent months, what I've come to realize is that I don't really feel at home anymore, even in the queer community, with people who are it's not that, it's I don't fit there. I don't feel like I fit there anymore. But I certainly don't fit within heterosexual communities or identities, and so I feel like I'm in a place of learning and discovering how to carve out my own space around my sexuality. in ways that works for Christia and and that might be coming up with our own language or our own sort of rules around that, or what have you. But one of my biggest fears when I started my transition was the loss of the queer community, and I'm still queer. Don't go labeling me as something other than queer. But I've come to realize that as much as I've always understood that within the LGBTQ community, there was only basically one component of all those letters that had to do with gender identity, how you felt about yourself, as opposed to your sexuality, who you interacted with and how you interacted with them. And I understood that from my brain point of view, but I feel like I'm coming into the place of understanding that yes, there's commonality amongst all of us that are LGBTQ, but there's something very different than for the T portion of all of those, and our experience with regards to our identity that has nothing to do with who we're interacting with and how we're interacting with them. And that's not a marginalizing statement. I think that it is important, I think it's crucial that LGBTQ people stick together, and that we are allies, and that we support each other in the movement towards equality and recognition and validation. But to say that the experience of LGBTQ people are the same as the experience of T people, I don't believe that. And I would think that LGBTQ people would feel the same, maybe. I don't know. I might get in trouble for that statement. So I'm in like the 2.5, almost 3 year mark of my transition, and I would have to assume that some of this stuff is just the normal part of transition and deconstructing masculinity and femininity in our culture, and really taking a look inward and figuring out who I am, and how these things are fluid experiences, and they're going to continue to shift. And what I've learned thus far in my transition is to not talk about tomorrow or the next day, or make promises about the future, because I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to be as far as how I label myself and how I identify. All I know is how I'm doing that right now. And when I am not 2.5 years into transition, but 5 years into transition, will this be different? Possibly. Will it be the same? Possibly. I just don't know. But I don't want to get complacent in not continuing to think about it and deconstruct it. The other night, for the first time in my entire life that I can ever remember, that's not to say that I haven't had these dreams before, but the first time I've ever remembered having a dream, in my dream I had a penis, and it wasn't like surgically altered. It was an authentic part of my body, and it didn't look like cis men's penises, but it was an interesting sensation, and it was as real as I could imagine it ever would be or could be. And I don't typically remember my dreams, and my dreams are like super wacky, like I'm leaping from buildings and riding unicorns kind of shit. Like they're not like, my dreams are all over the place, but this dream was very clear and is very concrete, and it had a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's staying very present with me, and I can almost conceptualize what it would be like had my body been developed or been born in a way that is more congruent with how I identify. And I think that that's interesting, because I'm still working on that. I still have a tremendous amount of dysphoria with my body, and it impacts my life in significant ways. So I think that dream goes along with the ongoing exploration that I have of my gender identity and my sexuality. So I've recommitted to Facebook. My Facebook's up. I've recommitted to YouTube, and I've kind of recommitted myself about being an active participant in the formal and informal education of myself and people around me, and not becoming passive in this experience of life. So hopefully you'll all be seeing much more of me, and thanks for watching. All right.